Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today in the show, we have Trina Dora. She is an internal medicine hospitalist and a life coach. She wrote the Kevin MD article, How Divorce Helped This Physician. Trina, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
Yes, so as you mentioned, I am an internal medicine hospitalist, and so I've been doing that for several years. And I wrote the article particularly about my divorce. And so I met my ex-husband during my fourth year of medical school, and we got married the day after I graduated from medical school, and we were married for about 7 years. And the marriage ended in divorce, obviously. And so I always knew from the very beginning that I wanted to use that experience to help other people. I'm always drawn to people who use their own personal hardships to help others. Like I've always just been fascinated by that and people who are able to do that. And so thankful that people are willing to share their stories. And so I always knew from the beginning that I wanted to be somebody who is very open about my divorce so that I could use it to help others.
So tell me how that experience affected you as a person and also you professionally as well.
Right. So, yeah, in the article, I talked a lot about how there was so much shame.
Mhm.
And I think as physicians, obviously, we're very high achieving people and we are not used to failing at anything. And so, whenever you get divorced, it can feel like a failure. And so, that was how I felt. And so, it really affected me because this was a new experience, failing at something. There was a lot of shame around it. And I didn't really want to talk about it at first. I didn't want other people to know, like, I didn't want my colleagues to know, the
Mhm.
nurses at work, that my marriage had not worked out. Now I have a very different view on it. And I do think that it's okay for physicians to reach out. It's okay for physicians to tell other people about their divorce and look for support. So many people have gone through it. And that was something that I realized once I started talking about it, that there were a lot of other people and other physicians
Mhm.
I met who had gone through the same thing. But initially, I thought it was something that I had to hide.
So as you were going through the divorce, did you have any support and were you still working full time as a hospitalist during that experience?
Yes, I was still working and I did have support. So, a lot of different kinds of support. So, I joined support groups of other divorced women. I had a therapist. I also hired a coach to help me as well. I had family, friends, support through my religious community. So, I did have a lot of different support.
A lot of physicians, as you said, are also undergoing divorce, unfortunately. Now, what are some tips that you could share with them for those who are undergoing similar experiences?
Right. So one of the things I always tell people is to not be so worried about the fear. Like I had
Mhm.
so much fear of the unknown. So even though I knew it was a bad relationship, I knew it was unhealthy and that it really wasn't good for me to stay, I was so afraid of what the other side was going to look like. And so I convinced myself that maybe it was better to just stick with this horrible situation because I just wasn't sure. I didn't have the faith in myself that I could handle it. And so that's one thing that I always talk to people about is not allowing themselves to just live in the fear that we can do hard things, we are stronger than we think we are, and you can get through this. There are so many people who have gone through divorce and come out successfully on the other side. And in fact, I actually look at my divorce now as one of the best things that ever happened to me. But of course I had to go through that process. And so now when I look back on it, I just think about how much extra time I stayed just because I was so afraid
Mhm.
of what was on the other side. Now I'm on the other side and I'm like, well, why was I so afraid? This is
Sure.
so much better.
So you said that the divorce was one of the best things that ever happened to you. I was wondering, can you share a story of how divorce has benefited you professionally as a physician?
Right. So I think whenever I was married, and this happens to a lot of people in marriage, you end up losing your voice,
Mm.
right? So I kind of molded myself to fit into the marriage, to try to make it work, and I really lost who I was. And so whenever I exited the marriage, I didn't have the highest self esteem. I just wasn't really sure of who I was. And so I think going through that process of having to deal with the grief of divorce, and I mean, it's painful,
Hmm.
and then having to figure out how to work through that, come out on the other side of that, definitely has made me a better physician. I no longer am as scared. I don't have any problem expressing my opinion, speaking up, expressing my voice. My self-esteem is so much better than it was before. And, I think a lot of times in just medicine in general, just the process of medicine often tears us down. You enter into medicine thinking you're the smartest, then you go to med school and you're like, oh, wait, look at all these people who are so smart. Then you go to residency, and it's very easy to kind of be torn down in that process. And then you're in a bad marriage and you're torn down even further. But going through that process of having to get through it and heal does change you. And I do think I'm a stronger person now than I was before. So I'm able to deal with challenges better, obstacles, etc.
Did you confide in any of your colleagues or anyone at your workplace as you were going through this?
So I actually did not really confide in anybody at the beginning. People start to notice things though after a while. Your spouse doesn't show up anymore. You stop wearing your wedding ring. And then there were a couple of people that I did speak to it about. But again, initially, I just had so much fear and shame over the fact that it didn't work out that I just tried to handle it alone, or talk to other women who are going through the same thing, who I met through support groups who were completely outside of my job. I had a lot of fear that people would think that it would impact my abilities at work. And so I didn't want people to know I was going through it, because I didn't ever want anybody whispering saying, oh, well, she's getting divorced. And so because of that, I did choose isolation, which probably in retrospect may not have been the best thing. I remember one time I did open up to a physician and she said, oh, I've been divorced too. And I remember being like, oh, wow. And look at her today and look at how well she's doing. And then that provided me with a lot of hope.
Now, after reflecting on this experience, is there anything that you would do differently?
I would say that I would not have probably stayed in the bad relationship so long, because I stayed out of fear. And so reflecting on that experience, I think that after, we tried all the things, tried the counseling, et cetera, and knew it wasn't going to work, I think I would have moved on a little bit more quickly if I hadn't been so afraid. So now I don't have those same fears like I had before. So, if I ever were to get divorced again, which hopefully I won't, I wouldn't stay out of fear.
So you mentioned in terms of resources, you talked about therapy, you talked about life coaching. Now, any other physician-specific resources you could recommend to other clinicians who may be going through divorce?
Right. So like I said, the things I did several different things. And so even just from my own journaling, right? So that was one of the very first things I did was I got a journal, and I used to journal every single day, because, the journal is always there. Friends aren't always there. The therapist isn't always there, but your journal is always there 24/7. And so I would always be writing and getting my thoughts out on paper. And then, like I said, I joined a support group with other divorced women. I hired a therapist. I hired a coach. I became involved in my religious community, which really helped. And then I also started spending and reconnecting with friends from college. So I went on some girls' trips and things like that. So it really was a combination of all of those things.
We're talking to Trina Dora. She's an internal medicine hospitalist, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, How Divorce Helped This Physician. Trina, in addition to being a hospitalist, you're also a life coach. Tell me a little bit about that transition into life coaching.
Right. So a couple of years ago, I hired my own life coach, and it was just very transformative. I loved it. And I loved the fact, it was actually a man, and I loved the way that he was able to impact people's lives. And so obviously we go into medicine because we want to impact people's lives. And then I was introduced to this other profession where I got to see him impacting people's lives in the similar way, having the same magnitude of impact as I had as a physician. So I immediately was drawn to coaching and thought it was fascinating. And I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to help divorced women. So as soon as I made the decision to become a coach, I already knew that I wanted to use my skill as a coach to help divorced women.
So from some of the experiences that you had being a life coach for divorced women, what are some red flags that some of your clients have shared for you in the past? And what are some things to look out for?
So in terms of red flags, one of the biggest ones I always tell people is to trust your intuition. So specifically within coaching and within divorce coaching, I have a special interest in infidelity and cheating, simply because that's part of my story. And so I always tell people to trust your intuition. I think a lot of times when you are in a bad relationship, it can become very easy for that other partner to twist things, maybe even make you think you're crazy, that you're not seeing what you're seeing. And so one piece of advice I have, trust your intuition. And then also, I think it's so important for people to work on their self-concept, their self-esteem, because so much flows from that, right? Like it's really hard to make good decisions. It's really hard to move forward. It's really hard to heal if you have self-hatred. And so I think working on self-esteem, I hear a lot of divorced women who say, I just can't believe that I stayed. I can't believe that I put up with that for so long. And I just really think that working on our self-esteem, our self-concept is one of the key foundations for healing. Like you have to love yourself first before you can really make any substantial changes.
Now, physicians generally are high net worth individuals. Do you have any tips from a financial standpoint when it comes to physicians undergoing divorce?
Right. So, I am not a financial analyst, but I will tell you that there are divorce coaches out there who do have some specialties within finance. So I do think that it's a good idea to maybe seek out somebody who either a divorce coach with some expertise in finance or just a financial analyst, a financial divorce analyst, because there are a lot of things that you may not think about, or things that maybe your lawyer does not necessarily incorporate as part of their services. And whenever you're going through a divorce, and the reason I think it's just in general important to seek out wise counsel, because when you're going through a divorce, you're not always in the best mental space, right? It's incredibly stressful. Emotions are running very high, and you don't always make the best decisions. Also, I've noticed that a lot of times people are going through divorce and they still love their partner. Even though their relationship isn't working out, they still have love for that person. And I hear women particularly sometimes say, well, I don't think that, he would ever try to hurt me financially. I don't think he would ever be hiding money in accounts or things like that. And so I do think that seeking out wise counsel, objective sources as you're going through divorce can be very helpful. Seeking out coaching to help you work on your emotional aspect, but then also seeking out people who can help you with the financial side of divorce as well. I think that's a good idea.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Right. So I think I just want to let people know that divorce happens, that it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. I don't think we should think of ourselves as failures simply because we've gone through divorce. And I really think that divorce can be the start of something beautiful to come. And that is one thing that as I was going through the divorce, if you told me that in the future, I would look back on my divorce as the start of something amazing, that I'd be very thankful for it, thankful for that experience, I wouldn't have believed you as I was going through it. But that's a message I would want to leave with people, that yes, it is terrible and it can be awful and, all of the things that we think about with divorce, but there can still be good that comes from it. And making sure you take the time to invest in your own emotional healing is key.
And how can people reach you?
Right. So I do have a website, drtrinadora.com. I have a Facebook group, a free Facebook group called Women Moving Beyond Cheating and Divorce. You can always DM me on Facebook, and then on Instagram, I'm at Trinadora.
Well, Trina, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.